Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, I have Chrystyna Lucyk-Berger. If you love historical fiction that actually brings you back in time, this is the new author to check out. Thank you for joining us from Austria.
Thank you. Yeah. I am out here in the Alps. I always have to say that because otherwise people think it's Australia. And we have cows, not kangaroos.
Oh, okay. Good point. How did you come up with the girl from the mountains? The main character especially.
So the story was inspired by an anecdote that my girlfriend shared with me. So there is a group of us who meet and write together here. And she told me a story about her husband, and it was a story of revenge. And it took place in Czechoslovakia in World War II. And when I heard the anecdote, my mouth just dropped. I'm very interested in what makes people tick and what motivates people to do certain things. And it was such a dark story that I wanted to know who would be pushed to that level. And I had the idea of taking this and making that into my novel. Is about a woman who is pushed beyond her limits, and then she has to decide, is she going to take revenge or not? How I came up with Magdalena, I started to write the story, and I realized that my character was very strong in the very first scene, and I really wanted to show what would have pushed her to this point. And I had a name. That was the first thing. And this usually happens with me, like a name will just come up. And if I'm stuck trying to figure out what my character is going to be like, I end up going onto Google. And in this case, I just went onto Google. I typed in Magdalena and I typed in Czechoslovakia. And all of a sudden, this picture popped up of a woman with a very large birthmark on her face. And that was it. I knew exactly everything that I needed to know about my character. I had her entire story. It was like instantaneous. And that's how I came up with her.
Wow. She just went through. It's a great tale. It really pulls you in. How did you do your research, though? Because historical fiction it can be hard to do. I mean, people are looking at it to get enjoyment out of the read while learning a little bit more about history, but you actually made us feel like you were there. And you included, some like myths or things that people in that area believe in, like there's bad luck in odd numbers, things like that. Yeah. So how did you do your research to come up with the pieces that really take the reader into that time period?
Well, the first thing is that I intended to only write a short story. So right there, I had the excuse, so to say, that my research was not going to have to be all that detailed. And I decided to stay true to the anecdote and place the story in Czechoslovakia. So the first thing for me was to find a town that was going to be big enough to hide her, because she would eventually be on the run from the Nazis. And so I went on to Google. I knew what I did not want to do was be in Prague. I wanted to be somewhere where maybe the majority of my readers may have never have visited, because again, I was writing a short story. And so I didn't feel like I wanted to go into too many details and have people say, oh, I've been in Prague, so I must have seen that pub or whatnot. Yeah. So the first step was for me to choose the location. And I found a town called Litoměřice. And it was on Google. Seriously, I just thought, oh, this looks great. This looks perfect. It's very bohemian looking, etc. So I'll just choose that. And it wasn't until I had her on the run that I actually zoomed out of this town on Google Maps, and I realized that Theresienstadt is right across the river from it. Now, Theresienstadt is one of the concentration camps in Czechoslovakia, and when I saw that, I suddenly understood what the entire story, how absolutely she would be influenced by what was happening in the Jewish ghetto there, and that helped a lot with the story right there. But it wasn't until I started to expand the short story into a novel, and that because I only live 7 hours from Prague, so gosh, not even. Sorry, 5 hours, 5 hours away. And when I started to put it together as a novel, I went on a road trip. I called my graphic designer, and she and I do a lot of road trips together. And she and I went to Lucyk-Berger and started doing some research there. It's important for me to go to the settings of my books because it's where I get the real wind into the sails. The culture is important, the rhythm and the tone of how the people speak as well. When you speak with them in English, you realize how much culture, how much of their accents and their culture and influences come out in the language. And I try to capture that when I'm writing. So I have German people and I have Czechoslovakian people in my story here, and quite a mixed bag, actually. So I wanted to make sure that I had some of the words that would be authentic to them, some of the culture and the traditions that would be authentic to them, and then also the landscape that in where she would find herself.
But what about all the attributes of resistance fighting? What did you draw from, and how did you do the research for that?
Yeah. The resistance stories come from previous research where I had, I would say it's been now 25 years, unbelievable, but it's true. But 25 years ago, I was interviewing my relatives who had been partisans and in the resistance in Ukraine. And so I had an awful lot of research to pull from that as far as how the partisans worked and so on. The other stuff that I did was when I was in Lucyk-Berger, I actually met with the people in Theresienstadt. And one of the historians that I met with is his colleague. He does these reenactments for World War II. And he's very knowledgeable about, for example, the military aspects and such. They could tell me, for example, exactly which regiments were in Lucyk-Berger on the day of liberation. So I pulled a lot of this stuff from previous research and then the current stuff that I do as well. And I write World War II, so I have a vast library of materials that I pull from as well.
I like how you tied it all together, and that these were ordinary people, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the roles that they had to step into, and they actually just stepped into it, risking their lives. And
the story is really, again, I wanted to take normal people because those are the stories that I love the most. It's not necessarily about the well-known heroes, but the ones who find themselves that they have to be heroes. They have to make that choice to go above and beyond what they would possibly imagine for themselves otherwise. And for me, it was important to just take these normal people and put them into an extraordinary situation and to see what happens. And this is kind of where the author in me is a little bit like, I don't know, I would say witchy, or maybe just mean, I don't know, but I like to throw people into these situations and see how do they develop. Is it the good, the bad, or the ugly that comes out of the situation, And I think you'll see in Magda's character, you see that she's hit with a lot of ugliness. She even turns to drug and alcohol abuse, to cope with what she is having to deal with. And the question is she going to go to the dark side by the end of the war?
Yeah. I liked how you made her perfectly imperfect in the way that she approached situations, the mistakes she made along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
But
She's
how you
very,
learn from them too. That was really important to grasp how these situations, when you did the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, you could keep moving forward, but you better understood how to protect yourself as you kept moving.
yeah, yeah. Her foolish mistakes that she makes that actually sends her on the run. What was important for me is to take a character that is not courageous, and giving her this huge birthmark on her face, for example, was important for me because I knew that she would have had a background of being teased, of being uncertain of herself, of not having the confidence, and to put her in a situation where suddenly she is the nanny for a Jewish family. And then she feels for this family, because she sees slowly as the Germans are becoming more aggressive and starting to hunt down the Jews, she becomes afraid for them and is terrified.
What surprises did you learn along the way while you were writing this book?
I think the greatest surprise was that, for example, Theresienstadt, I didn't know very much about it. It was very vague in my Holocaust knowledge, that it existed, and to find out how this Jewish ghetto was actually used as propaganda to capture more Jews, that was fascinating at the same time as it was frightening. I don't know if anyone knows what happens there, but there were 2 films that were made, and Theresienstadt was actually completely redone, made up. The Nazis built a pool there. They gave the people clothing, food, et cetera, and they made this movie out of this that kind of showed the Red Cross and the international world that everything was fine here. That actually what the Germans were doing was protecting the Jewish culture from their wars and such. And that was, as one of my girlfriends said, that was like worse than anything she's read by Stephen King. It was really, truly horrifying to the lengths that they had gone to show the world that there was nothing happening in these concentration camps. So there was that one thing. The other thing that surprised me was also Lita Merici's role. Again, it was a fluke to choose that town, but it was one of the last stands. So at the end of the war, and Magda, my character, actually listens in as some Ukrainians and German commanders are talking about what should happen towards the end of the war. They find out that Berlin has instructed that they all flee to the west and over the bridge or from the bridge in Lita Merici. So Lita Merici was their last exit to the west, where they might end up in American hands rather than Soviet hands, because the Germans knew that if they were captured by the Soviets, they were not going to come out of it alive. So for them, their one hope was to be caught by American allies and American forces, and then they would possibly have a chance of surviving the capture. So that I, again, chose a town that was so significant towards the end of the war really, really helped me to finish that end part of the book. It was fascinating.
That is fascinating. How many historical novels have you written?
So I'm sending on Monday, I'm sending in book number 9 so, to my editor. So this was book number 8. And now I've just got number 9, the first draft, done.
Wow. How long have you been writing?
I think the question is better, how long have I not been writing? I started in the 2nd grade. So my grandmother, it's amazing. It took me so long to make this connection. My grandmother was a historical fiction writer, but she wrote about the Cossacks and the Rus, and her stories all took place in the past, in Ukraine's past. And it wasn't until I was writing this current WIP, which takes place in Ukraine in World War II, that I really like, I remembered it. And that I made that connection. And I thought, actually, I think I was predestined to write historical fiction, but I started writing in the second grade. But at that time, I think I was writing ghost stories.
That's so cute.
But seriously, I started, I think in 2010 is when I really sat down and started cracking at it again. I made a big, huge life decision to really give it another try. I've done everything. I studied veterinary medicine. I've worked in retail. I've done journalism. I worked as an editor. I then jumped over the desk and I left America and I went to Austria. I've built my own business. I'm now a professional trainer and communications coach here. I've done so many different things, and I'm really glad I did, because they enrich my stories. Like, I can pull so many different experiences and details. And not only that, but the travel that I've done, just listening to other people where I visit those countries and such. This is actually how I get my inspiration for stories, is by traveling and discovering something. And I want to know then something deeper beneath those, the layers of history. And that's the thing that I've set out to do. And I would say, honestly, 11 years ago is when I said, this is it. I'm going to write this first story. I was inspired by Theresienstadt, which is in northern Italy. It's a huge reservoir. Mm-hmm. And in this reservoir, so I'm just going to take you on this trip with me. You're driving from Innsbruck to Italy, and you go over this mountain pass, and it's been Tyrol. All this time it's Tyrol. You've got these block houses. You've got everybody selling Speck and Knödel and Apfelstrudel, and then you go over the border and you think, great, now I'm going to start blasting Eros Ramazzotti, this pop singer, this Italian pop singer, because now I'm in Italy, but nothing changes. Like, you cross over the border and nothing changes. It looks exactly like Tyrol. And I thought to myself, okay, well, maybe it needs a little bit of time. And you go over this pass and there's beautiful Alps and mountains and fields of flowers and everything. And then all of a sudden you see this enormous lake. It just stretches from where you are to the southern horizon. And I found out that's like 4 miles long. Okay. Huge lake. And it's like, do you remember snow cones? This blueberry snow cone color? That's what it looks like.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, wow, I've just landed in paradise. And you cut through this one first very Tyrolean looking town. There's nothing Italian about it. Tyrolean looking town. And then you pass another one. And suddenly it's there. This huge 15th century church tower, steeple, coming out of the water. I stopped, and my very first question was, how does that even happen? You're driving along this lake and there's this steeple sticking out of the water. And at the time, nobody could really answer the question for me. And it took me quite a bit of time, and I didn't speak German at that time. I was brand new in Europe. And it took me some time, but I thought it was so beautiful down there. It's called South Tyrol. I thought it was so beautiful down there that I would go there every year, at least once or twice, right? And that's what I started doing. And the puzzle pieces started to fall together about what had happened at this reservoir, that there are 7 villages beneath that lake. And at one point, it was 2005, I was finished with my first historical novel. At that point, I took a trip down to kind of celebrate putting out the first book. And I stopped there like I always did, like I had been for 4 years. And I took a walk on the lake, and all of a sudden, and this is going to sound like those goofy writer things that happen, but it's true, I swear it. There's like these ghosts coming out of the water. And it was so clear. There was a woman, there was a young Mongoloid child, there was an innkeeper, there was a young man from Germany there. Like, all these characters just appeared at above the surface of the lake. And they got into my Nissan Micro, And they didn't leave me for the next, I think I'm going to say now it's been 16 years that they've been with me.
Wow.
And that was a story that burned. That was a story where I said, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to really do this right now and correctly, meaning me. And that was in 2010. So that's when I started writing the Russian Valley series. And those first 4 books appeared in 2018 and 2019. And now the last one in the main series is coming out in April this year.
Wow. How many books do you write a year?
I don't know why and how this all started, but all of a sudden I'm releasing 3 this year. So since early summer last year, I've been seriously writing 3 books at the same time. Yeah, I know.
How do you keep everything logistically correct and the characters?
So yeah, you would think it's surprising. So actually, authors normally are writing 2 books at once. Normally, yeah. And usually, what they do is they'll get the first draft out, then they get structural edits, and in the meantime, they might already start planning their next book. Yeah. So it's not unusual for authors to be working on 2 books at once. So one is editing, the other one they're writing new. But I had already set out to finish the last book in this series. So again, it's the last book of the Russian Valley series that I've written, and I had already been a year behind schedule. And I said, absolutely, I must be determined to finish this book. And then I got the offer from Book Couture for The Girl from the Mountains, and because I had already started writing that, we needed to add just, I think, about 30,000 more words. So it's about a third of what the current size is of the book. So I added another third to that. I was writing the Russian Valley book, and I had to start planning and plotting for the next book for Book Couture. So Book Couture signed me up for 2 books. And I said, no problem. I can finish one, then I start writing the other. And yeah.
How many hours a day do you write?
So I run a business, and I have a seasonal business, and I'm usually working from, I would say, about January to June, and then September through until December, until Christmas. And then I switch tables, and I'm a full-time author. But because of COVID, there's been a lot of changes and a lot of things that I've been doing differently. So when I'm writing full time, it will take me approximately 12 to 13 hours to write a chapter a day. And because I've been under such pressure right now, I'm working 18 to 19 hours a day. And that's not a joke. So
Wow.
Since December 9th, I have been working 7 days a week and writing this current WIP. But it's there. I'm glad to say it's there. Yeah.
No, it came out fantastic. I can't wait to read more of what you write. What's
Thank you.
next?
So the next one is it's loosely based on my relative stories. And the story takes place in Ukraine in World War II, and she is part of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, and is basically a spy. She vets out new candidates for the organization to free Ukraine from the Soviet regime, except that World War II breaks out. So the Blitzkrieg comes, and suddenly everybody is kind of on the run and spread out. And it's also a very slow-burning love story. And at the moment where she finally gives in to her childhood friend, they are split up. She's taken to Danzig and ends up in a slave labor camp, and he has to join the partisans to escape the aspects of World War II. Yeah.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about the drug Preventin. I actually didn't know about that, and I had to look into it more.
So this became kind of a key situation. Again, I was studying how Magdalena goes from a very shy, very good girl, like she grows up with this family where they are, yeah, they go to school, they go to church, they're, farmers, and there's not much happening. Like she's just really, really traditionalist, to where she's on the run, and she's now, she has to learn how to shoot. She has to learn how to take care of herself. She has to learn how to fight, how to commit sabotage. And she's dealing with all of this, that is all these changes that are happening to her, as well as not knowing whether her friends are dead, whether her family survived, all of this stuff that's going on with her, and she has to deal. And one of the things that I set up as foreshadowing at the beginning of the book was that when things become very stressed, when Hitler, when the German Wehrmacht actually marches into Czechoslovakia and takes it and creates the protectorate, Magda is losing sleep, like she can't sleep. And so Dr. Tauber, whom she works for, gives her a couple of sleeping pills, and he says they're just really mild, but it will help you, and so on. And what's really missing for her is that safety net. Her family's not there. Her brothers who have protected her all this time are not there. And she feels vulnerable, and she's
But
very weak.
What are the effects of the drug, and how did Hitler use it with his military?
So Pervitin was pretty common to actually give to soldiers. It's cocaine, basically. And it would keep you awake, and it would keep you alert, like give you real alertness. And when Magda does this, it's because she's freaking out. There's a lot of stuff going on. Plus, she's also a nurse at this point, so they're working long, long, long hours. And it was normal for them. Like my mother told me about how when she was in college, they used to take stuff like speed. That's what it was, They would take speed to stay awake and make sure that they stayed alert and could study for as long as they could. It wasn't that unusual. What was surprising for me, though, was and I think I brought this in because I had been doing research for the story in Italy. Mm-hmm. And while I was doing research for that, I discovered how popular cocaine was in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s. I had no idea, like it would never have occurred to me that this even had a role in any of this. And having that information in the background for me was how I ended up pulling it into Magdalena's story.
It did make sense out of other things. If you read historical fiction or study history, it did help to make sense of some of the other things that you heard in other stories, the way that they were so driven and focused.
Yeah.
And it made it scarier that it had a name.
Yeah. that it was so used. When I was doing research for this, I had no idea how very popular it was among, it's not that it was popular. They weren't all it was just common. They just prescribed it. They just had it, available to them. And that's what they used in order to be able to do all the stuff that they did as soldiers. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing so much about what you do and your exciting novels.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you love historical fiction, The Girl from the Mountains will completely sweep you away. We'll see you soon.